Hello everyone, I am Tacit, and today I'm going to be going over the new Gems of War Mythic of Stellarix as our final video for 2023. So Stellarix, of course, was added in version 7.3 of Gems of War, and is pretty much the strongest troop we ended up getting in 2023, and had quite a bit of competition as well. This ended up being a pretty decent of the new Dragonite-related troops. We basically have two sets of them now, the 7 Gem Dragons and now the 7 Celestial Dragons. As far as they are concerned, I would say the average Gem Dragon is a little bit better than the average Celestial Dragon as far as their usability. However, the final reward that you end up getting from the Cosmic Dragons is definitely worthwhile, and is the main thing that we're going to be going over. It deals a bunch of damage to all enemies, however, a lower max range than that of Diamantina. Diamantina still has the biggest max range in the entire game, the other Gem Dragon. However, this thing has a lot more loop potential. It ends up creating 3 Elemental Stars and 3 Umbral Stars. The Elemental Stars counting as every color except for yellow and purple, and the Umbral Stars counting as, well, yellow and purple. And then there is a 10% chance that it will gain an extra turn, boosted by skulls at a 4x boost ratio. So not only can the X-Shape Destroy off of the Elemental Stars, and the Plus-Shape Destroy off the Umbral Stars, as well as just aligning on the board for extra turn, but it also has a decent chance to also just extra turn from the amount of skulls on the board, giving it essentially 3 different opportunities to land and extra turn. This, in combination with how much AoE damage it does, makes it among one of the stronger AoE loopers in the game. Obviously, we have things like Truffle, which is more consistent but does less damage per cast, whereas this does substantially more damage per cast, though does have an overall less extra turn chance compared to 100% off of something like the Truffle. As far as its traits, it doesn't have anything too noteworthy. It is a bit tanky, having 30% score reduction and 55% spell reduction, making it among one of the more viable things that have a lot of reduction. As it's basically a tank mythic that you're using purely offensively that can also loop into itself. So basically fixes the tank mythic issue. However, you would never actually use this as a tank. You're generally going to be putting this in a pretty safe location further back on your team, and that spell reduction will hopefully keep it alive for quite a while. And if they somehow get down to it, you also have some skill reduction there. It does have a little bit of extra skills that ends up gaining. However, all the Gem Dragons do this at a higher rate. So while it will gain a little bit extra stats to all of its skills every single time you end up taking anything there with the skulls, it's not really that much, and you'll gain double the benefit from going down the Gem Dragons. One of the biggest issues, I would say, with these Celestial Dragons overall, not counting Stellarix itself, is mostly all the other ones are just worse than the Gem Dragon counterparts. They deal a bunch of damage to all enemies, convert 5 of an already existing color into Dragon Gems of that already existing color, which is worse than the big giant gems that we were able to get before off the other ones. And then there's a 10% chance to gain extra turn boosted by blues. So it doesn't have any damage boost ratio, but does have a little bit of an extra turn chance there, but it's not really worthwhile. It does have that same score reduction, spell reduction, but also has that reduced amount of extra skills. Like, for example, the blue version of the Gem Dragon would do 2 to all stats, so they're still better in that regard. Like, if you ever want to stack out, let's say, like with red, with the 1 loop trip that you have with them, you end up gaining double the amount of magic. Compared to the Cosmic one, you'd only be gaining 1 magic per red, whereas this, of course, gives 2. And as is applicable to Diamantina and all the other ones, it just gains double the amount of benefit. So overall, if you are going to be going down the route of going down Gem Dragons or going down Celestial Dragons, I highly, 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 highly advise that you get every single Gem Dragon before you get all the Cosmic Dragons. This is mostly because the Gem Dragons, well, 2 reasons. All 7 of the Gem Dragons are pretty much usable, whereas the only good reward you get from the Cosmic Dragons is the very last thing of Stellarix, which we'll be going over in a moment. As far as the Cosmic Dragon Egg, they're, of course, 10% more. But also, every single dragon that you get up to that point are pretty much obsolete compared to the Gem Dragon counterparts. There will obviously be restrictions where you might be able to use it, like obviously this thing in Broken Spire, whereas the other ones wouldn't have access to such. But aside from those niche situations, in a 1-to-1, if you're allowed to use anything, you're pretty much always going to be using the Gem Dragons. So if you haven't already done the Gem Dragon grind for Diamantina, I would highly advise doing that before the Cosmic Dragons. But as far as getting this dragon, all you have to do is go through all of the eggs, hopefully RNG, and get all 6 of them. Luckily, we got really lucky and got them all first try, whereas it took us 27 tries to get them onto Gem Dragons, as you kind of saw by our numbers that we had earlier on. After that, for the Cosmic Dragons, you then have to go get their 2 corresponding weapons, being the Solar Winds, the Lunar Tide, and then having those 2 weapons then allows you to get the Decaying Orbit, and then after you got absolutely all of those things, you can then go get yourself a Stellarix. So, let's go and start going over some Stellarix teams. There are 3 teams that we're going to be going over. One of them you've probably seen me use quite a few times because I've actually been using as my main middle PvP team. But it's worth mentioning as it's paired with one of the other really broken things we end up getting this year. And that, of course, is Daughter of Time. She ends up having an Hourglass effect. And Hourglass gems, they're yellow gems that when taken through any means, destroy or any other, they will give you an automatic extra turn. And this bypasses freeze and every other mechanic in the game that currently stops a turn. So we essentially just go for Leprechaun, go for a nice wand and get our mana going. We then go for this before we end up casting the Stellarix. The reason for this is we're placing Hourglass gems on the board. And ideally what we end up doing here is the Hourglass gem will get taken from our ability. So we can simply go put a bunch of extra turn mines essentially on the board. Then one of these stars will end up hitting it if it doesn't already hit one on the board. And then we'll gain our extra turn. And then you just keep looping right into it. And you just keep doing that over and over again. I'm using Mech with it so we actually have Dispel without needing to go to a different one. The wand itself does have Dispel on it by basically doing Curse. But by having a Dispel on your team, which we're doing through Mech due to the 50% mana start, we can simply do it off of our hero class and allow us to constantly keep going for the better elemental stars that we need for mana accumulation, which is kind of the route that we went down there. But you can also just simply curse off the Umbral stars. But you will have a better chance of extra turning if you go for the elemental stars, then straight into Daughter of Time, then straight into Stellarix, then recast Daughter of Time before every single Stellarix, and obviously Leprechaun just to get it all rolling. Anyways, let's go over to the next team now. Actually, let me go grab it. All of which will be in the description below, of course, if you want to go and copy-pasting them. Next, we have ourselves a 4x Dragon build, as is kind of to be expected. Works pretty good with 4x Dragon. A couple different ways that you could build it, depending on what your restrictions are. This is obviously being able to use anything. And what we're doing with this is we're converting yellow to red, which might sound a little, or sorry, red to yellow, which might sound a little bit weird, given that the main thing we actually need is red, that we'd be denying red. But we're mostly doing this just for our initial mana and to get the board cleared. Once we do get a lot of it. The only problem with this is we will have a little bit of a slower start, but this is the best we have for Empowered Dragon at the moment. Otherwise, it will be replaced if we ever get a better option. We just currently do not have that better option. You know what? I'm just going to go for it here. Get that little bit of mana, even if we don't end up extra turning from it. We do end up getting it somewhere in all that Cascade mess. And even though we don't have as many reds on the board, we can still start clearing out the board, going crazy from there. And honestly, it just looks like we're only going to need the 2 Stellarix, not even going to need the loop part of this team, which ends up getting us a bunch of red. We end up getting Rubaraf scaling us. Every single time we take a red, all of our red allies will gain 2 magic. And just keep doing that over and over again. If we ever get a better Empowered Dragon, that will very quickly replace out this last slot. But it's the only one we currently have, and we kind of need that to get the full boost ratio from the Huntmaster. And for our final team here, a bit of a cheaper team, though it does use 1 legend. It's more so a 50% mana start team. But it does use some pretty cheap options, and that is going down the Essentia route. So Essentia gives 50% mana start to all dragons, and this, of course, is a dragon, Stellarix. Oddly enough, one interesting thing about Stellarix, as well as all the cosmic dragons compared to the gem dragons, I'm not sure if this is an oversight on their part, but all of the cosmic dragons actually count as, not bosses. So as you see right here, they're all dragon. But if you go to the gem dragons, they actually all count as dragon boss, which is actually a bad thing, not a good thing. Because that means they take 5 times damage to a good number of troops in the game that can, you know, have the boss slayer effect that do 5 times scroll damage to bosses, but also have an ability that do 5 times damage to bosses. Well, we don't need to worry about that with something like Stellarix and all the other cosmic dragons, as at least currently. This could change in the future. I'm sure this is oversight or is intended, but they currently only count as just dragon, not as dragon boss, meaning they cannot be hit by 5 times damage by all those troops, making them a lot tankier. Not only because they can't be hit by that 5 times damage, but also because, well, they just are tankier. While they don't have as high of a skill reduction, they have that 55% spell reduction, which more often than not, especially where you're going to be using them, is going to make them tankier than they would be otherwise. As very rarely are you actually using these troops in first slot. They're normally more so like your second, your third, and depending on your team, potentially even the third slot. Very rarely are you using as your frontline tank on a given team. Unfortunately, we are frozen right here, and this team does not have anti-freeze. Is the only big issue we have here. That was one nice thing about running a wand team, of course, is we do have anti-freeze for any of those kind of situations. But we'll go get our little bit of mana down. We have Box Strider for mana accumulation. We have Leprechaun for mana accumulation. This team also, unlike our first team, which is actually why we ran it with it too, does not have a Dispel counter, which is going to be a little bit annoying here, as we actually have no counterplay to it on this cheaper team. The easiest way to do it would be how we did it on the previous team, where we end up using a mech hero class. A mech hero class, or any hero class that has Dispel, will allow you to Dispel on extra turn, and that can easily get rid of Submerge, whereas right now we don't have as good of an option to end up getting rid of Submerge. I think our best bet is actually to go for a Clear and just literally give him a Skull. I actually should have given that extra turn Skull that was on the board. Look right here, we just deliberately let him have the Skull, and we should be able to just kill him from there. Oddly enough, the Leprechaun being the tankiest thing on this team. Or in their team, I should say. We're not frozen on green, so we can go for that, get our other one down, and that is match. And yeah, it's easy as that. It's a very, very powerful troop. Not as loopy as some troops in the game, but has really good quick damage potential. It is not completely overshadowing Diamantina, though. Diamantina is still really good in instances where you need, like, one big poke. Do we actually have a team set up for it? I'm not sure if I have a team randomly here, though I know this one's kind of like one. But whenever you need just like one gigantic big poke, it does have a higher damage range than that of Diamantina. The biggest, than that of Stellarix, I mean. The main reason being is that its boost ratio does actually apply to its AoE, full AoE that it has. So it does ultimately end up having a bigger damage range. So for example, things that you'd want to one-shot on, these include things like pet rat events. Actually, this one I could actually show the team. Like for stuff like this, it's actually still better to run Diamantina, as you will just one-shot every single battle, every single time, whereas you don't really need Stellarix's extra turn potential. Stellarix is only particularly good if you need to cast 2 or more times to win a fight, but if it's within one-shot range, it is still better to use Diamantina or similar full AoE that you might have, as it not only has a slightly lower mana cost, but also just has a bigger damage range, so there's a much wider range they can end up hitting up to. For example, this team can one-shot all the way to Battle 6, and with the help of Empress, can also one-shot both Battle number 7 and Battle number 8. So in instances like this, dungeon battles, if you're going to use it for that, pet rescue, adventure boards, modes like that, you'd still be running Diamantina, where Stellarix is probably a bit more useful in things like PvP now if you happen to have it, because generally against like similar statted enemies, you're going to need to cast it at least 2, 3, maybe even 4 times. Same as things like Underworld, for example. Underworld and even Deep Underspire, in situations where you can end up using it. It is going to be a little bit better to end up running Stellarix rather than running Diamantina, as Stellarix, especially when you start hitting like 300, 400, 500 range and things like the Underworld, the stats start to get pretty high, so you're going to end up needing to have multiple casts, and Stellarix does multiple casts way better than Diamantina does. Diamantina is used for the one-shot battles. Stellarix is used for battles that you need more than one AoE to take it out, either 2 or higher. So that's pretty much the game plan for those. But anyways, that is the rundown on good old Stellarix. But yeah, long story short, get all the gem dragons first. But if you do eventually have enough, go for all the celestial dragons. Get all these first. Go get Diamantina. I still personally feel like I use it more. But if you ever finally get the resources that cost 10% more to get these as well, eventually go and RNG yourself into a Stellarix. It is definitely a very absurdly strong troop, but you can live without it. You could easily get away with most things just using the Diamantina and the 6 corresponding dragons. These are more so just later in the game once you've kind of gotten excess Dragonite. It reminds me a lot of like the Zolgoth compared to Catharix kind of situation these days, where the original one is still better. You would always get Zolgoth before you get Catharix, but even though Catharix is good. And that's kind of the same situation with Diamantina to Stellarix now. Do all the gem dragons first. The originals are still a little bit better. And then after you finish all of them, eventually go for your Stellarix. Could still take a while, even though we covered this a little bit a few weeks after the fact. I'm pretty sure most of you still might not have this. It's a very hard troop to obtain. And I definitely advise if you already started on the gem dragon grind, or even if you're just newer and you're just going for one or the other, definitely go for the gem dragons first, even though Stellarix is absolutely amazing. But all the teams will be in the description if you want to go use any of them. If you have been messing around with it, feel free to leave any teams of your own down there. Would love to see what they are. Hope you all have a wonderful 2024, and I will catch you guys next year. Goodbye, everyone, and thanks for watching.